Hi students, this class will give you an overview of the marketing research process. First, I'm going to lay out the steps in the marketing research process. Then I will go over when marketing research is needed and especially when it is not needed. And then lastly, this class will serve as a framework to help understand the next classes because it gives that bird's eye view. So here's the steps in the marketing research process. Some people like to summarize it in 11 steps, some do it in less, some in more, but either way you could consider the first group of steps to be about problem definition and pre-research. So in the first stage, what you will do is identify the problem you want to investigate, set your research objectives, determine the right research design to investigate that issue, and then lastly, determine how to access your data. You may want to do some preliminary research, such as secondary data analysis, to get to know the problem you will be investigating. Next is the stage of data collection and analysis. So in this stage, you will actually collect your own primary data, whether that is through survey research, focus groups, experiments, or any other method. You will collect that data and analyze it. And then lastly, you will prepare and present a final research report. This is very common in the marketing research industry as well, where you as a researcher or as a consultant present your findings to the client you are working for. Now, very important is to understand that in some cases, marketing research is not needed. So let me illustrate this. So let's say, for example, you have the amazing business idea to launch backyard saunas that are solar powered, but you're not sure what would be a good location to start looking for customers for these individual high-end solar-powered backyard saunas. So, which factors would help you determine what would be a good location for your business? Indeed, a lot of factors such as climate, temperature, affluence in a certain area, so average income in a certain area, square footage on average of people's lot sizes, their backyard sizes in certain areas, and so on. All of this data can be found in secondary databases. So government data, Google Maps, there's a lot of sources that can give you that information without you having to actually walk around the whole United States with a thermometer to capture the temperature and measuring the lot sizes. So you don't have to actually collect that data yourself. So in this case, primary data collection would be unnecessary to accomplish your goal. So this brings me to the first step, establishing the need for marketing research. This, to a large extent, depends on the company's policy. So there's always a trade-off between the value and the cost of information. Data or information is very costly and it's very expensive and time-consuming to collect that data yourself. So you really want to think carefully about what the added value will be of collecting that data yourself. So by consequence, some companies adopt a very strict no research policy. It's rare and it's very ballsy to actually pull off a no research policy, but some companies get away with it. Some companies actually develop or make certain decisions, develop certain products or certain branding based on very limited or no research at all. Modern Times is an example of a company that basically follows their own intuition to a large extent and doesn't really investigate market trends as much as most craft beer companies do. So again, very risky strategy, but in some cases it can work. Most companies do at least some form of periodic research. So that means they do research from time to time, such as customer satisfaction studies, or they track their own and competitors' brands' performance over time, which are called tracking studies. Other companies focus more on situational research. So this is research on an as-needed basis. So that means they would do a consumer use test right as they are about to launch a new product or a new concept test for new product development. Now, overall, you can see that as the amount of research that's being done by a company, as that goes up, usually growth and profitability goes up as well. So in this graph, you can see that a no research policy usually results in limited profitability and growth as opposed to frequent research or occasional research. So the thing is as well that usually bigger companies can do more frequent research, which then again creates a self-fulfilling prophecy where they can actually grow more and become more profitable. So in that sense, it becomes kind of a cycle where when you have more access to resources, you can do more research, which again also increases your access to resources because it makes you more profitable. So it can create this self-fulfilling prophecy here. Another article that I included the link of below in the note pages, and it's totally for your own information if you want to read it. This article in the Wall Street Journal shows that basically the decision or the big bet not to do any research at all or ignoring marketing research altogether is very reckless. And this is one of the strategies that Tesla has been applying as well. So if you want to read more about this and decisions that are based on no research at all and the risks that come with it, I invite you to click the link to the article of the Wall Street Journal in the note pages below. Now, a company's policy regarding research can determine not only the type of research that's being done, so whether the company focuses more on tracking studies, such as fast-moving consumer good companies focus a lot on tracking studies, or whether they want to focus more on focus groups and so on. But the company policy also determines at what level research is done. So research is usually implemented at different levels or departments within a company. So there are management decisions, strategy-related decisions, such as what should be our company mission, that are based on research. So what should we be like as a company overall, like the more existential questions that a company is facing, more strategy-focused decisions. But also on a micro level, more marketing strategy related decisions, such as how should we set our 4 Ps? What should be the price of our product? How should we change our packaging based on consumer insights we gained? All of these decisions can be based on research as well. So research can be very pervasive throughout different layers and departments of a big organization. Now, in summary, when is marketing research not needed? First of all, if the information is already available, like the example I gave with the backyard saunas, if you already have data, census data, government data, climate data, and so on people's income, on temperature areas in the United States, on our square footage of backyards and so on, if all of this information is available, you don't need to do any primary data collection. Secondly, when the timing is very urgent, such as in very hot markets, new developments that are pressing, then in that case, you probably don't want to be wasting your time on doing more marketing research, because if you clearly see where the market trends are heading, then you want to jump on board of that train. You don't want to be spending your time investigating whether there's even a demand if the demand is already shown. Third, when there are budget constraints. A lot of smaller companies do not have access to enough funds to do research and also to implement the results of that research. Think about it this way. If you're a small restaurant owner and you want to know whether customers like certain aspects of your restaurant, whether that is the menu options, the price, the service, the parking space available, the ambiance, and so on. So you do a survey and you ask respondents, so your customers, to rate each of these aspects on a scale from very unsatisfied to very satisfied. And let's say that based on this survey, so this marketing research study you did, it turns out that people are happy with all aspects of your restaurant except the available parking spots. So basically they want more parking infrastructure. But now you as the restaurant owner have spent basically all your budget on doing this research, on collecting this data and analyzing this data, and you no longer have funds available to implement the results of that research, to actually create more parking space or more parking infrastructure. So that's something you have to keep in mind, especially as a small business. It's one thing to allocate resources to do the research. Make sure you also have budget in hand to implement the results of that research, whatever those results may be. And then lastly, in cases where the costs outweigh the value of research, you're better off not doing research at all. Like if it's just not worth it, such as for very small, non-profitable markets, in those cases, I would recommend skipping research altogether. Another side note when it comes to doing research, and I know I'm giving a lot of side notes here, and you might be thinking, why am I even teaching marketing research if I'm giving all these disclaimers? It's because I want you to be clearly thinking and understanding of the value that research can give. In some cases, research can be misleading, especially with radical innovations. Think of, for example, beta testing, where consumers are asked to think of the applications of a certain product, rate the user friendliness of a new innovation, and so on. In a lot of these cases, consumers are unable to envision radical innovations, and they may not be able to really predict where the market is heading. And in relation to that, I found this really interesting interview with Steve Jobs that I'm going to show you. If you don't like to watch video within video, then of course just skip this part and watch the video just on YouTube directly.
How important is market research? How much did you rely on it in the early days?
Well, I think in the early days it was very easy because you could go to a homebrew computer club meeting and there was your whole market. And so you could find out what they thought. Matter of fact, you show them your product and see what they thought. And you could, because the products were much simpler then, within a few months you could change it all around and come back and show them a new one. But as the market got more sophisticated, it was less easy to do that. And the problem is that market research can tell you what your customers think of something you show them. Or it can tell you what your customers want as an incremental improvement on what you have. But very rarely can your customers predict something that they don't even quite know they want yet. As an example, no market research could have led to the development of the Macintosh or the personal computer in the first place. So there are these sort of non-incremental jumps that need to take place where it's very difficult for market research to really contribute much in the early phases of the thinking about how to, what those should be. However, once you have made that jump, possibly before the product's on the market or even after, is a great time to go check your instincts with the marketplace and verify that you're on the right track. And usually when you show people something, they'll say, "Oh my God, this is fantastic," or give you some feedback along those lines.
So, as this video illustrated, marketing research is not always useful, especially in the case of radical innovation. The second step in the marketing research process, once you have established the need for marketing research, is to define the problem. And defining a problem, we have a separate class on this, but it's actually very important because if you define a problem wrong, you're basically doing the wrong research. You're doing research on a problem that wasn't even the problem to begin with. So defining your problem in a very specific way and avoiding very complex problem statements is really essential. If there's more than one issue you want to solve, it probably results in more than one research question. So let's say, for example, you're interested in who are the loyal customers of Plant Power, but you're also interested in how you can convert McDonald's customers into Plant Power customers. But in addition, you also want to know what Plant Power menu changes could increase consumers' interest. If all of these things are of interest to you, then you probably have separate research questions, which will probably lead to more than one research process. So keeping it small and very well defined is essential also for your group project. The next step is establishing your research objectives, and research objectives tie in very closely with your problem definition. So it basically pertains to what information is needed to solve your research problem. If problem is A, then what do you need to solve that problem? In other words, what is your to-do list in terms of research? What data do you need to gather? What types of information do you need that would enable you to ultimately solve that problem or that question? Again, circling back to the example of the backyard saunas, if you want to know what would be a good location for launching solar-powered individual or family units of backyard saunas, then what information you need is climate data, income data, and so on. And this information is your research objective. Your objective is to gather that type of data. The next step is determining research design. So that is picking a design that fits or aligns with your problem definition and your research objectives. There's a variety of research designs to choose from, and in this course, I'm going to explain several of them. So basically, you can choose based on objective. If your objective or your goal, your research goal, is to explore versus to describe or versus to explain causal relationships, it will have implications for the type of research design you choose. Exploratory methods, descriptive methods, or causal methods. You could also go by data source. You could pick primary data or secondary data. Primary data is data that you gathered yourself, such as, for example, surveys, focus groups, and so on. Secondary data is data that was already collected by someone else before you. So, for example, data you find in libraries, in online databases, search engines, and so on. You could also specify your research design by methodology, so qualitative versus quantitative. Qualitative means it pertains to words, quantitative means it pertains to numbers, and we will elaborate on this a lot more in further classes. You can link your type of research method to the objective you have, so to your research objective. Again, if your objective is to explore, you will use an explorative method right here, which will most likely result in qualitative research, but could also be quantitative. If your research objective is to describe, let's say, for example, describe personality traits, describe characteristics, describe income levels, and so on, you're going to be using a descriptive method, which could be qualitative or quantitative. And if your goal is to explain a phenomenon, like why do people do certain things, so you want to look for a causal effect, you're going to be using causal research methods, which are always quantitative. We cover this more in depth in further classes. Next step is identifying information types and sources. So basically, will you collect primary information or secondary information? In this class, in this course, you will be using both. You will be relying on secondary data first, so looking at what's already out there in libraries, online databases, and so on. And then as a supplement, you will collect your own primary information with first-hand data. Next step is determining methods of accessing data. Specifically, how are you going to get your data? Are you going to access that data by talking with people face-to-face? So basically, are you going to have a face-to-face interview with a person? Are you going to do telephone interviews, online interviews, mail surveys, and so on? So there's several different ways of accessing your primary data. And all of this, again, depends on your research objectives, your research problem, and so on. So it's very tailored to your specific research needs. Next step would be designing your data collection forms. You're basically going to design a survey. And there are several survey design tools, and the one we're going to cover in this class is called Qualtrics, so I'll teach you how to work with that. But either way, when you collect data, you want to make sure that the tool you work with, whether that's a questionnaire or an interview guide, that it is worded objectively, clearly, and without any bias. So order matters. So the order in which you ask your questions matters a lot, because a question that precedes another question could influence people's answer to a subsequent question. So the order in which you place them definitely plays a role. And then lastly, wording matters as well. So how you word your questions has huge implications for how people answer these questions. If you ask questions in a biased way, in a leading way, right? If they have an undertone, a subjective undertone, and they tend to steer people or steer people's answers in certain directions, you will end up with unreliable data. So it's very important to keep your wording very objective, neutral, and without any bias. So we will have a class specifically on survey design where I will teach you all the tips and tricks on how to create good data collection forms. Next, you will determine your sample plan and sample size. This is very important when you do quantitative data, especially because it has implications for how representative your data is and how accurate your data will be. So basically, very simply put, we want to do research, we want to understand a population, we want to understand society, we want to understand consumers. But we can't ask every single one of our customers. We can't ask every single inhabitant on this planet. We can't ask everyone in the population. That's why we sample. Now, this sample has to be set up in a certain way that it is representative and accurate. So there's tricks to make your sample as representative as possible and as accurate as possible, which I will cover in one of the next classes as well. Next, you will actually go ahead collecting your data. And it sounds ridiculous that we have 8 steps prior to the 9th step of collecting data. And all of these previous steps, these 8 steps, basically are just building up to data collection. So there's a lot of prep work going into research to set you up for success before you go about collecting your data. But then the moment is there and you collect your data, but there's a couple pitfalls. There's always something called non-sampling errors or data collection errors, same thing. And they can happen in your data collection process, but must be avoided as much as possible. So for example, you could ask the wrong question. You could accidentally skip a question as an interviewer. So there could be small or bigger errors that happen during the data collection that compromise the quality of your data. And no matter what you do with statistics afterwards, so no matter how good of a statistician you are, you can never fix bad data. So it's really essential that the moment of data collection is focused on minimizing these data collection errors. The next step would be to analyze data. So when the data comes in, you can use software programs such as IBM's SPSS, but there's several others as well, to help make sense of your data. Because what's the point of collecting all this knowledge, all this information from people if you can't understand it, if you can't analyze it? So I will teach you a couple different basic techniques on how to make sense of your data. So we're going to cover descriptive analysis, independent sample t-testing, ANOVA, which stands for analysis of variance, cross-steps, chi-square analysis, correlations, regression analysis, and so on. Lastly, you will prepare and present a final research report. Like I said, this is very common in the industry as well. You will communicate both the process of your research, so how did you go about doing the research, but also the results to a client. Now, in this case, there's no client, the client is me. So this is the whole overview of the marketing research process.